Good afternoon, managers. Thank you all for joining me today. In this presentation, I am going to talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act, specifically in the area of wage and hour. First, I will overview the Fair Labor Standards Act requirements for employers. Then I will discuss the criteria on classifying an employee as exempt or non-exempt. After that, I will review a relevant court case that pertains to this topic. And finally, I will address the expectations that this company has for you as managers to help protect us from such lawsuits. By the end of this presentation, you should have a thorough understanding of the basic requirements of the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you have a question at any time during my presentation, please feel free to interrupt me. I will also keep some time after the presentation to answer your questions. According to the Department of Labor, quote, the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, which prescribes standards for the basic minimum wage and overtime pay, affects most private and public employment. It requires employers to pay covered employees who are not otherwise exempt at least the federal minimum wage and overtime pay of 1 1/2 times the regular rate of pay, unquote. So this all sounds a little confusing, so let's break it down a bit. First, minimum wage and federal minimum wage. Is there a difference? Yes, there is actually. The current federal minimum wage is set at $7.25 per hour. As of August 1st, 2014, 23 states and Washington, D.C. have a minimum wage that is higher than the federal level. So what are employers to do in situations where their state minimum wage is higher than the federal? In these cases, the employer is to follow the state minimum wage requirements. As with many employment laws, where there are both federal and state guidelines, employers are to follow those that most benefit the employees. Now let's talk about overtime pay. As mentioned earlier, overtime pay is paid at 1 1/2 times the regular pay, but nothing was mentioned as to when overtime pay goes into effect. According to the Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, quote, unless exempt, employees covered by the Act must receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week at a rate not less than time and 1/2 their regular rates of pay, unquote. So, for example, if an employee is non-exempt and the regular hourly rate is $10, and if they worked 45 hours in the work week, what should their gross pay be for that week, including overtime? First, let's take the 40 hours of regular pay times $10 equals $400. Next, let's calculate the overtime pay. 1 1/2 times the regular pay is $15 per hour. This employee worked 5 hours over 40 in the work week. So we take the 5 hours times 15 equals $75. We then add the $2 amounts together and find that this employee's gross pay for the work week is $475. Let me just go back over that again to be sure I spoke it correctly. So in our example, an employee is non-exempt. Their regular pay is $10 an hour. They worked 45 hours in the work week. We first take the 40 hours of regular pay times the $10, that equals $400. We then calculate the overtime pay by taking 1 1/2 times the regular pay, which gives us $15 per hour. We then take 5 hours worked over 40, which is, 5 hours times $15 is $75. We then add the $2 amounts together and find that this employee's gross pay for the work week is $475. That's just a simple example. Of course, there's other situations where the pay may fluctuate, but just for simple math's sake, that's an example of overtime pay. Now, the words exempt and non-exempt have been used a few times already during this presentation. Let's discuss those terms and review the criteria to qualify an employee as exempt. According to the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, for an employee to qualify as exempt, they must perform certain job duties and be paid on a salary basis at least $455 per week. Some job duties to be considered exempt include, but are not limited to, the following. They manage an organization or a specific department within the organization as their primary job function. They direct the work of at least 2 employees. They have the authority to make employment decisions of others, such as hiring, firing, promoting, demoting, and such. They are professional with an advanced knowledge in a field of science or learning that has been acquired by specialized prolonged study. They perform outside sales, in which their primary job functions are to sell, obtain contracts for services, or obtain orders. These employees are also engaged in business away from the employer's home office on a regular basis. And finally, job titles do not determine exempt status. So what happens if an employee is misclassified as exempt from overtime? Well, lawsuits emerge. Let's look at a court case involving Citigroup, a division of Smith Barney. On September 16, 2004, a $98 million class action lawsuit was filed against Citigroup for recovery of unpaid wages to employees. Plaintiffs claimed that Citigroup knowingly classified employees as exempt from overtime based on their job titles, not their job duties. For example, one plaintiff claimed his job title changed to account manager even though he was doing the same duties as before and managed no one. This plaintiff stated that he was doing the exact duties as other non-exempt clerks. Another plaintiff was moved from temporary hourly status to permanent status and became salaried and exempt, even though his duties remained the same. Thousands of Citigroup employees were affected by being misclassified as exempt from overtime, and this turned out to be a costly mistake for the company. This brings me to my final point of the presentation, and that is, what does our company expect from you as managers to avoid such costly mistakes? First, if you are going to hire an employee at minimum wage, please keep in mind both the federal and state minimum wage amounts. If the state minimum wage is higher than the federal minimum wage, you must pay the higher state wage. If you have a non-exempt employee that works over 40 hours in a work week, you must pay them 1 1/2 times their regular pay to be in compliance with the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. If you have an employee that you believe should be exempt status, please review the criteria as was mentioned earlier in this presentation to be sure your decision is correct. If you have any question whether or not to make an employee exempt, please consult your Human Resources Department. To sum it all up, we know that the Fair Labor Standards Act has certain requirements for employers in regards to minimum wage, overtime, and status, whether or not to make an employee exempt or not exempt. It is our responsibility as managers and human resources professionals to assure that we are complying with these requirements, because if we don't, lawsuits may emerge. I presented you a few key areas to focus on to avoid these costly lawsuits, and I expect you to adhere to them. I would recommend that you review the Department of Labor's website to become more familiar with the FLSA requirements, and I would also encourage you and recommend you to consult with a member of Human Resources at any time to discuss questions or concerns you have regarding this issue. Now, are there any questions for me at this time? Okay, I appreciate your attention today and want to thank you for attending this presentation. I hope you found this information helpful. Thank you.